Alright guys, Corey Margera Show here, back with a new episode. And this video was inspired by Diesel 101 Raw. He's one of my favorite subscribers here on YouTube, and he's also subscribed to my channel. He basically did a video titled his unpopular opinions on pro wrestling. You know, he's basically talking about stuff that he likes that no one else likes, things that he doesn't like that everyone else likes, you know, stuff like that, you know. And he inspired me to make this video. You know, he basically did an update because he had one already, but this was like a newer one that he updated for now, for this year, for now. And I did one before as well, but I want to update mine now too, since he did his. And without further ado, you know, this is just going to be talking about things that I like in pro wrestling that no one else likes or no one else really thinks of. And I'm not going to talk about Daniel Bryan and the fact that I think he's overrated, because we already know that. You already know that I'm not a huge fan of Daniel Bryan, so I'm not going to point that out in this video. I'm going to talk about stuff that, you know, I may have touched on before, but you know, I'm going to give a little more detail in this video of, you know, things that I just like or don't like in wrestling. And, you know, basically, so let's get started. And, you know, one thing I really want to touch on is the fact that I was just always a huge fan of Randy Orton as a babyface. You know, I really liked when he spit in Triple H's face. I really thought that was a great storyline. It was a great opportunity for Randy Orton to get over as a face. And I don't know why people don't like Randy Orton as a face. Me personally, I think he's fucking awesome as a face. When he was you know, the legend killer. Like, now he's getting stale, but back then, you know, there were a lot of people saying like he was boring and people didn't like Randy Orton as a face. They preferred him as a heel, and I completely disagree with that. You know, once he beat Chris Benoit at SummerSlam 2004, I thought it was a perfect opportunity for him to come out into like this cocky, rebellious character, you know, like fuck Evolution. He was going to rebel against Evolution, Eric Bischoff, you know, the regime on Raw. You know, he was spitting in Triple H's face. You know, he was just like, he was doing some really cool shit. You know, he was RKOing people out of nowhere. He even took a page out of Triple H's playbook. You know, he brought the sledgehammer down. He was about to destroy Ric Flair with that sledgehammer. I remember on Raw, Ric Flair was being stupid. And, you know, Randy Orton, he was about to knock Ric Flair right on his ass. You know, he was about to knock Batista out. He was about to knock Triple H out. Triple H was livid. He was so pissed that Randy Orton was the world champion and that he did what Triple H couldn't do at the time, and was beat Chris Benoit. You know, and I just really enjoyed Randy Orton's face turn, and I was completely pissed off when Randy Orton turned heel when he faced The Undertaker at WrestleMania 21. That was just a huge disappointment for me. And, you know, speaking of WrestleMania, I have to say this. I actually made a video about this, but I want to get to it a little more in depth. I always thought that both Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero were highly overrated. I do think that they are very overrated by the IWC, YWC. You know, I used to like Benoit. I used to be a huge fan of Benoit because he was just like no talk, more about business, you know, getting in the ring. But he was just not a great world champion, honestly. And Eddie Guerrero, everyone loves Eddie Guerrero, but I really just could never get into his Latino Heat character. I thought, you know, he did some funny things, you know, with Chavo, with the whole lie, cheat, and steal shit. You know, I thought that was pretty amusing. I thought that was very entertaining. But, you know, I just never got into Eddie Guerrero like that. I just never found him to be that entertaining. You know, I thought he was okay, but I thought he was, you know, a mid-card at best. I never saw Eddie Guerrero as a main eventer. You know, I never saw him as carrying SmackDown, you know, during like the Dark Ages and stuff like that. You know, I just thought that he was just, you know, highly overrated by the IWC and a lot of even the casual fans. I was just never really into him. I thought, you know, his Latino Heat shtick was just too stereotypical, too like stereotypical Hispanic stuff. You know, you've seen it before where like Carlos Mencia, George Lopez, and stuff like that. You know, it was just I didn't care for it. You know, and I never saw him as a main eventer. And Benoit, you know, I was a huge fan before he did what he did. You know, obviously I lost all respect for him, but you know, he was a great wrestler. I was a huge fan of Chris Benoit, you know, prior to 2007, you know, because he was just no talk. He was all about business. He was all about being the best technical wrestler. You know, he was a great heel. He could be a great babyface, but I just never, you know, when he became world champion, I just never, like, I thought it was just, yeah. You know, I mean, I like the fact that they were given opportunities to be main event champions, but you know, they just didn't have it, you know, but that's just my opinion. I was never really a huge fan of them as world champion, you know, and I just never was a huge fan of Eddie Guerrero, period. You know, with all the low riders and all the pimp my ride type of shit that was going on back in the mid 2000s, you know, him coming out with a low rider on SmackDown every week, you know, it was just too cheesy, man, you know. It just was like, yeah, it was meh. Um, you know, and speaking of, you know, the Guerrero name, you know, I really thought that this gimmick was fucking awesome and it should have lasted a hell of a lot longer than it did. All right, this is Kerwin White. For all you newer PG fans who never heard of, you know, Kerwin White, this was what Chavo Guerrero, he basically went through somewhat of an identity crisis. Let me give you a little backstory. His character got sent to Raw, you know, in 2005. And, you know, basically Raw was not like, you know, the big um, pawn for like cruiserweights like SmackDown was back in the day. But, you know, I just love this character. But, you know, Curran White, he was basically talking about how, you know, he thought like he was better than what he was. You know, he didn't like um, you know, like how a lot of the stereotypical Latino shit was, and I agree with him. I agree with Kerwin White's character, Chavo's character. You know, I don't know if that was him speaking from the heart or just his character. If that was his character, I agree with his character 100%. You know, because I'm sick of all this Latino stereotypical shit. You know, all this Boricua and Mexican, all this stereotypical shit you see with like Mexicans and stuff like that. It's just so cheesy and so overdone, you know, which was one of the reasons why I was never a huge fan of Eddie like that. But, you know, I respect Eddie Guerrero, but I'm not a huge fan of him. But, you know, Chavo, you know, he decided to come out with this, you know, Uncle Tom, Uncle Ruckus type of character. You know, he was basically like the Uncle Ruckus for Hispanics. You know, he started dressing up like a middle class white guy. You know, I use that term loosely because anybody could dress up, you know, with a button down shirt and some slacks and, you know, a sweater and stuff like that. But he was basically doing this whole Anglo-Saxon shit. Um, you know, he was like for all white values, and you know, if it's not right, if it's not white, it's not right. And I was just marking out like a motherfucker. I thought this guy was a great heel. You know, he was coming down with the golf carts and stuff like that. He was like, you know, Chavo, he's gone. He's probably with all the other unemployed Hispanics. Yeah, that was fucked up. But I thought it was really, really entertaining. I like Kerwin White. You know, he's being somewhat of a bigot, racist, self-hater, whatever you want to call him. You know, I enjoyed this gimmick a lot. I really wish he would have kept it, but, you know, Eddie Guerrero died, so he had to stop. I love this gimmick. I don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. I know a lot of people thought it was distasteful, you know, but to the Guerrero name, but I don't give a shit. You know, it's an unpopular opinion. I loved Kerwin White's gimmick. I thought it was great. And, you know, I just thought, you know, he added a lot of flair to his character, which I was just never a huge fan of Chavo, period. Aside from, you know, him as a cruiserweight in WCW, I thought he did some good stuff. He had some great matches with like Shane Helms, Rey Mysterio. He had some great matches with, you know, a few other people. I remember he had, I think, was it him against the Jung Dragons in late WCW? I forgot. But he had some good cruiserweight matches. He was great in WCW, but in WWE he was just stale. And you know, this just really freshened up his gimmick. And, speaking of, people who were just sick of illegal Mexicans and stuff like that, let's talk about JBL. Let's talk about this guy. He was champion for almost a year. A year? Was it? Almost a year on SmackDown. And I don't care what anyone says. Diesel 101 Raw will agree with this one. I thought JBL was a great champion on SmackDown. He was a great cowardly heel champion. And what a better time to do this than 2004 when, George Bush had a lot of heat. We were going into Iraq. He wanted to go to war with. At first, we were supposed to go to war with Afghanistan. Then he went into Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction. And for one, I hated George Bush. I thought he was a terrible president. Say what you will about Obama, but Bush was worse. And he's the reason we're in so much debt, period. All right, you could say Obama, whatever. All right, Bush did a worse job. And he got this debt started. But, I thought JBL was a great heel. I thought he was excellent because he was basically the George W. Bush of SmackDown. He was this Republican from Texas who, he looked down on the lower class. He looked down on like Hispanics. He looked down on like Wiggers, like Cena, and ghetto people and stuff like that. He was the one who used to bully people in high school. And like he's like this rich white conservative American. I just thought it was a great stereotype of the typical Republican, and I just thought he was very entertaining. What was that episode of SmackDown when he was pretending like he was drunk and he was about to have sex with Godzilla? He was about to. What was that episode? I mean, and he had the whole cabinet with Orlando Jordan and the Basham brothers and that other chick, I forget her name. I mean, he had great feuds with everybody. I mean, I thought his match with The Undertaker at No Mercy 2004 was highly under. Was it No Mercy 2004? No. Was it? No. Survivor Series 2000. No. No Mercy. It was No Mercy where he fought The Undertaker. Yeah. It was No Mercy 2004, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Because no Mercy. Yeah. Because it wasn't Booker T yet. Yeah. It was Undertaker 2004. And I thought that was just a great feud that he had. I mean, I was pissed off because I wanted Undertaker at that point to become champion again. But JBL did a great job as a heel. He got a lot of heat. I thought he was a better heel than even Triple H at that point. And I was a huge hater of Triple H. I hated Triple H. I thought he had a lot of great heat. I thought Triple H was a great heel naturally because I hated his ass. But, I just thought JBL was perfect because it was what better time than 2004. And we were right around, the 2004 election too. And, he stole his matches at No Mercy and Survivor Series with Booker T and Undertaker that year. Just like George Bush, he beat John Kerry in the election. And, I wasn't a fan of either or, Bush or Kerry, but I hated Bush more. Period. And it was just funny because at the time I really wanted Undertaker to go over because I was a huge fan of the Undertaker going back to his gothic dead man gimmick, growing out his hair longer again and just being the dead man again. But that brings me to my next point. I actually did enjoy the Undertaker during his early days as the American Badass. And I know a lot of people on the internet, especially in the YWC, that started to hate The Undertaker during this period of time. They literally thought that this character was terrible. They hated the American Badass. They missed the Ministry of Darkness Undertaker. They missed the Zombie Undertaker. They missed all his other, gothic dead man impersonations and stuff like that he used to do. But I was a huge fan of Undertaker coming back with the biker gimmick in his early days. And I'm talking about from 2000 and 2001. I thought he was great. I loved his American Badass by Kid Rock. I hate Kid Rock. I'm not even a fan of Kid Rock. But I thought that song was fucking badass. I thought Limp Bizkit Rolling was badass. I don't even like Limp Bizkit. I don't even like Fred Durst. I thought that song was fucking awesome. And I thought The Undertaker was just so badass during that time. You know, he came back at Judgment Day 2000. You know, he interfered with The Rock and Triple H's Iron Man match. You know, and basically it cost The Rock the title, but, you know, he came back with a vengeance. You know, he was like punking out Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon. You know, he was you know, just giving last rides to Steven Richards back during the Right to Censor days. You know, giving last rides to Kurt Angle. Um, you know, he was a badass during this point. You know, he was riding the motorcycle. You know, he did a lot of cool shit. But I hated when he cut his hair in 2001, in late 2001, and he just became a piece of shit. I thought The Undertaker during this point was a piece of shit. I hated when he turned heel and cut his hair. And I like heel Undertaker. Undertaker can do a good heel, but this was his worst heel run. And I even hated when he turned face again in late 2002 when he was feuding with Brock Lesnar. You know, I literally, aside from that feud with Lesnar, I thought 2002, 2003 were The Undertaker's worst years. I thought they were terrible. You know, say what you will about Undertaker now, he needs to retire. No, I thought this was worse. I thought he was feuding with Ric Flair. I still won't forget that botched chokeslam he gave Hulk Hogan at Judgment Day 2002. This was his worst. This was Undertaker at his worst. And I don't give a shit what you say. This was The Undertaker at his worst. This was pathetic. Alright, he was feuding with Hogan and Flair and all these has-beens. Not even the good WCW veterans, but just like Hogan and Ric Flair, you know, they were has-beens at the time. And you know, and that brings me to another point right here of, you know, I always thought that, you know, Vince Russo was right. You know, and let me pull up his picture right now. I thought he was right when he bashed. Shit. All right, I don't have his picture, but hold on. Fuck, I had to find his picture. But yeah, Vince Russo, when he said that Hogan and Flair, you know, when he was talking shit about how, you know, he was just disgusted by seeing them in the main event at WCW toward the end. I agreed with him 100%. And on top of that, I thought that Vince Russo was a great heel character during WCW's dying days, and I don't give a shit what any one of you motherfuckers has to say about that. I thought Vince Russo was gold. Not what he wrote, but just him as a character. Him as an on-screen character was gold. I thought he was amazing in WCW toward his dying days. He literally made that shit entertaining as fuck. He was crazy. He was a fucking psycho. He was like literally like talking shit about Goldberg. He was like, man, if this was real, he thinks Goldberg can kick anybody's ass. And he was in that glass thing that what with Jeremy Borash was driving him around in that glass thing, and he was just talking so much shit. He went with the New Blood versus the Millionaires Club. I thought Russo was gold in 2000. I literally thought he was amazing. I didn't think what he wrote was amazing, but I definitely thought he was amazing. Him himself was amazing as an on-screen character in WCW during 2000. I thought he was great. I loved that Bash of the Beach promo that he cut on Hulk Hogan. I mean, he really put him in his place. I thought that was excellent, you know. And I love Russo in WCW 2000. Not necessarily him, but just what he did in that company. And on top of that, I also thought Jeff Jarrett. I was always a huge fan of Jeff Jarrett. And that's another unpopular opinion that I have here in this community. Because everyone hates Jeff Jarrett. They think he's crap. They think he's a mid-card at best. I always thought Jeff Jarrett, especially during the late 90s, early 2000s, was a fucking main event player, and I thought he was gold. I loved his slapnuts gimmick. He was always bashing motherfuckers in the head with that guitar. And he was just like, oh, look at me, you filthy slapnuts. And he was just always talking so much shit. I did not like the NWO 2000. I did not like that. But everything else, I thought, in the WWF, when he was saying, like, he was feuding with China and telling her that a woman shouldn't be in wrestling. He was making fun of Mae Young and Fabulous Moolah, and he was making fun of the Cat and all these other women in the WWF, and he was just acting like he was such a big shot, like a male chauvinist and a sexist. And I loved him in WCW when he was just like feuding with like Goldberg. Well, not Goldberg. No, he didn't feud with Goldberg. He talked shit about Goldberg, but he feuded. I liked his feud with Booker T. I liked his feuds with Sting. I thought they were pretty good. I thought they were very, very underrated too. I thought they were highly underrated for WCW, man. I thought Jeff Jarrett was a great heel. I don't give a shit what anyone says. I even liked him in his early days in TNA, all the way up until 2006. I thought Jeff Jarrett was a great heel when he had Gail Kim, America's Most Wanted by his side and stuff like that. I thought he was gold. I thought he was fucking awesome. And, that's just my opinion. I don't give a shit what any one of you thinks. Jeff Jarrett sucks. He never drew a dime. He broke 6,000 guitars and never drew a dime. All that bullshit. Alright, from what I heard, his Slapnuts t-shirt was a huge seller back in WCW during 2000. So, yeah, you can go fuck yourselves. Because I thought Jeff Jarrett was awesome. But, all you motherfuckers, you just want to hate on Jeff Jarrett for, like, no reason. And, it's ridiculous, man. But, you guys have no problem overrating, certain wrestlers. Like this guy right here. And yes, I do think he's overrated as shit. Because he is not that good on the mic. He is good in the ring. I'll give him that. But I was never, ever, 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 ever a fan of Christian. Nor was I a fan of Christian Cage in TNA. I thought his title run was forced. I thought he got the title too early. I didn't think he deserved it. I didn't think he was a big enough draw to carry TNA back during those days. Of all the people you could have got, you could have had Jeff Hardy. You could have signed him to an extension on his contract, back in 2005, 2006, right after that great Full Metal Mayhem match he had. You could have gave the fucking title to fucking Monty Brown. Monty Brown deserved it more than fucking Christian Cage. Monty Brown was definitely one of the most underrated black wrestlers ever. And he definitely deserved to be fucking champion. He had so much credit. He deserved it way more than fucking Christian Cage. Christian Cage is over fucking rated. Christian in general is overrated. Alright? And it was proof. I never was a fan of Christian. I never saw what people saw in this guy. I never knew what people overhyped Christian. Like, he was so great and whatever. I'm like, this guy is a mid-card talent at best. IC champion at best. Alright? And he should have kept his hair long, too. After Edge and Christian, he still should have kept his hair long. I know he cut it back in 2003. But, he should have kept it long, man. I really... he just does not look right with short hair. I always thought he was overrated. Alright? He was ECW champion at best, and that was because ECW became so watered down at that point. It was basically the C brand, the number 3 brand, so it was like, who gave a shit? I always thought Christian was overrated, never liked him, never cared for him. I never hated him, but I always thought he was beyond mediocre. I just never saw what people liked about this guy. And speaking of overrated Canadians, yeah, I would fuck her, yes. Don't get it twisted. Back in the day, I would fuck the hell out of Trish Stratus. But she was definitely the most overrated diva at that point in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, since Sunny. Alright, this chick was beyond overrated. We went from like fucking China, who was all about being a dominant badass and being powerful, to Lita, who was all about like high flying, cool moonsaults. She had a really cool, alternative look to her and shit. She had that really cool rocker, that punk rocker alternative look. And then we go to this boring Trish Stratus, who again I would fuck the hell out of if you gave me a 2000, 2001, 2002 Trish Stratus, I'd fuck the hell out of her. But that does not mean that she deserved to be booked as the best diva the WWE has ever had. No, I completely disagree with that. She was highly overrated. All right, she was okay wrestler, but she was nothing great. There was nothing that she did that was spectacular. There was no move that she did from the bulldog. Nothing she did from her kick. Nothing she did that was even like spectacular or like truly like, oh my god, this is magnificent. I was even a bigger fan of Victoria when she first came to WWE back in 2002 over Trish Stratus. I mean, Victoria had that really cool, what was the name of that theme song, man? All the things she said going through my head, the Tattoo Group. That was a great theme song too. I like that too. That was a great song. It was really popular, for a minute too. Especially, I heard it was really popular in the UK and Europe. But Trish was just overrated. I mean, she had that shitty Little Kim theme song, gay ass Little Kim theme song. I mean, she was just overrated. I mean, I'd fuck the hell out of her. She had a nice ass, nice tits. I'd bang the fuck out of Trish Stratus. But she, as a diva, as a women's wrestler, as a women's champion, she was highly overrated. All right, I definitely prefer Lita. I definitely prefer Victoria. I even prefer Molly Holly over Trish fucking Stratus. And that's just my opinion on that. But let's talk about a Canadian that I actually had a lot of respect for. I no longer respect this man, but he was fucking biblical in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was this guy right here. Yes, Y2J Chris Jericho. It was fucking awesome. From 1999 to 2001, this guy was the shit. He was fucking awesome. I remember in 7th grade, I was pissed because I didn't get that fucking kick-ass Y2J hockey jersey. And this I'm not even a hockey fan, but I love that jersey. I remember when he used to wear it back in 2000, 2001. He's that white hockey jersey that Chris Jericho used to wear. I wanted it so bad. I begged my parents for it. They didn't get it for me because we weren't rich growing up. When I was growing up, we weren't rich or anything like that, so they didn't get it for me. They ended up getting me other things that I wanted for Christmas, but No Mercy being one of them. But I really wanted that Jericho shirt, that hockey jersey he had. I was a huge mark for Chris Jericho back then. I thought he was amazing. I thought he was literally, for any of you who've ever played Devil May Cry 3, or those of you who are fans of old school Sonic the Hedgehog, or Gambit from X-Men, that cocky, arrogant, kind of douchebaggish, kind of like, even I would even compare him to like Tony Stark's Iron Man, but he was just way more badass. Like he was like the wrestling equivalent to like just a cocky, douchebag, but he was just hilarious. He used to always come up with the coolest shit. I remember he used to always call Stephanie McMahon a slut, and he used to always like tell people to shut the hell up, and that he was the Ayatollah of rock and roller. I mean, after 2001, this guy went completely to shit. He went to shit. They fucked his character up so bad. And there are a lot of people in the IWC who think that his 2008 2009 gimmick where he was wearing the suits and had the short hair, they thought that was the best interpretation of Chris Jericho. Fuck that. No, this Chris Jericho was the best interpretation of Chris Jericho. This was the motherfucking man. I still remember in 2001 when he called Stone Cold Steve Austin a bigger slut than Stephanie McMahon Helmsley. I marked out like a motherfucking bastard. I was like, yes, this guy has to become champion at King of the Ring 2001. I was like, if not Benoit, Chris Jericho has to become WWF champion. This is mandatory. This has to happen. This guy is so underrated. His 1999 to 2001 Chris Jericho was the absolute greatest Chris Jericho ever. In person, I was a huge mark for him. They fucked up his character after that. I don't know if it was him or Vince McMahon or whoever. They fucked up his character after that. I remember when he main evented WrestleMania 18 against Triple H. I was like, fuck this Chris Jericho. This Chris Jericho sucks. He's got this stupid little red ponytail. This garbage. You know, it was like, I like Jericho as a heel, but this was just pathetic, man. They booked him terribly as the first ever undisputed champion. I mean, that was just that moment should have been special. I mean, even when he won it at No Mercy 2001 against The Rock, he needed Stephanie McMahon to inadvertently cost The Rock the title. You know, and it just made Jericho look weak, you know, in a way. And I was against that, you know. But you know, I literally, that's an unpopular opinion, especially here in the YWC, because I thought 1999 Chris Jericho all the way up to 2001, late 2001 Chris Jericho was the absolute best. He was a fucking god. He had some of the greatest promos I've ever seen. I remember his promo with The Rock. You know, he was taking The Rock's catchphrase and The Rock was taking his catchphrase. That was the best Chris Jericho, hands down, bar none. I don't give a fuck what you people think. He was way better than 2008, 2009 Chris Jericho, and that, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. That may be an unpopular opinion, but I don't give a fuck. All right. And next, I just want to say that this guy right here, Mr. Dr. of Thugonomics, I always thought he was overrated as fuck. I don't get how people overrated this guy back in like the early 2000s when he was like rapping and wearing like fitteds and jerseys and stuff like that. I was like, this guy is a chump. He was like a white 50 Cent or some shit, a fake white Italian 50 Cent Marky Mark piece of shit. I always thought this guy was garbage, man. I was never a Cena fan, but I definitely, and this may be an unpopular opinion too, I've always thought he was garbage, and this includes his wigger rapper gimmick. I thought it was trash. I thought it was just cheesy. I thought it was meh. You know, I remember that episode when he shoved the soap down Paul Heyman's throat, and I was like, dude, I think Paul Heyman was a great heel at that time. You know, he was a great heel GM of SmackDown for a short period of time. But why, of all people, did it have to be John Cena to, you know, like get the best of him and stuff like that? I thought it was trash. You know, I definitely thought that, you know, John Cena was highly overrated during like the 2003, 2004, 2005 period when he was the rapper. I was never into rap music. I'm not into that shit. So, you know, I don't want to hear it. I never liked the guy. Never cared about him. You know, I don't know John Cena in real life, but I never liked any of his characters. Never. Always thought they were garbage. And, you know, speaking of SmackDown, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I always preferred the Ovaltron of SmackDown over the Fisttron. I never cared for the Fist. I never did. I mean, I thought it was cool at first, but I always thought it was better for like a pay-per-view. And I just always thought that this Titantron should have stayed, or they should have upgraded it and made it look, you know, a little, they should have updated it, you know, with the newer SmackDown logo, you know, but I always thought that they should have like updated. I never did care for the Fist Titantron. I never did. You know, I know a lot of people love the Fist Titantron. I think it's a cool Titantron in its own right, but you know, the glass shattering Fist Titantron and SmackDown was just never, you know, something that I really enjoyed, you know. I mean, obviously now we have those shitty HD Titantrons which are bland and boring as fuck, and they just look like some Grammy award stage, and it's just like, it doesn't fit a wrestling show. But the Fist, it did fit a wrestling show, but just not for a weekly basis. I thought it was good for a pay-per-view, but I never thought it was good for like the weekly SmackDown show. I always thought the Ovaltron was way better. The atmosphere, it just looked cooler for some reason. I don't know why. It just had the look. I mean, it had that look. It had a uniqueness about it that just made it look like cool. Maybe it's because it was the Attitude Era SmackDown that, I'm nostalgic for, but I just personally always liked this Titantron way more than the SmackDown Fist. But that's just my opinion. I don't know if that's unpopular or not, but I just wanted to get that out there. And speaking of SmackDown, I always thought, and I kind of made a video about this already, but I always thought that Raw was way better than SmackDown in 2003. I always thought it was the better show. I always thought it had the better storylines. I even thought Katie Vick had potential. And I made a video about that. So if you don't believe me, go watch that. I thought Raw, the storylines on Raw were way better. The only thing I didn't like about Raw was Triple H hogging the spotlight. I thought Eric Bischoff was a way better heel general manager. I thought Stone Cold coming back in 2003 was fucking epic and awesome as shit. I thought it had more wrestlers that I liked too, from like Rob Van Dam, Shawn Michaels, the Dudley Boys came back to Raw. Well, Devon came back to Raw later that year. Jeff Hardy. Booker T. I just like the roster on Raw a lot better. I mean, the only guys on SmackDown I really cared for were fucking Undertaker, who sucked at the time, Brock Lesnar, and Kurt Angle. I mean, and to a certain extent at the time, Chris Benoit, but that was it. All my favorite wrestlers were on Raw, basically. So, that's another reason why I liked Raw a lot better. And I know that's an unpopular opinion because SmackDown got higher ratings during those years, from what I heard, because of Paul Heyman writing the show. But another thing, I just never cared for the SmackDown 6. I mean, Edge and Rey Mysterio as a tag team just had no chemistry to it whatsoever. I mean, Eddie Guerrero and Chavo, okay. Los Guerreros was okay, but nothing like, oh my god. Chris Benoit and Angle, that was definitely funny shit. They hated each other. They would always beat the hell out of each other when they never had to tag team with each other. They had a bit of a rivalry. I thought that was pretty fucking good shit. But, I hated the Zach Gallen storyline, which in my opinion was worse than Katie Vick. I hated Stephanie McMahon as a general manager, period. Let alone as a face, which she tried to be a fucking face general manager. I'm like, Stephanie McMahon is not a likable fucking character. You can't turn her face. Alright? She's not a likable character. Everyone who watches wrestling sees her as a skank. Alright? Yes, I would fuck Stephanie McMahon if given the opportunity. Yes, I would give my middle finger to Triple H while doing it. But that does not mean she's a great character for wrestling. That does not mean that she's a great character on the actual SmackDown television show. That doesn't mean she's a great general manager. And her trying to fight back against Vince McMahon was completely unrealistic. Alright? Because we all know that even during the Invasion storyline, when she brought ECW and she was trying to put Vince out of business, her and Shane were trying to put Vince out of business, it was like unrealistic. It was like, you really think that this family, you really think that Stephanie McMahon, Daddy's little girl, would go against Vince McMahon? It's not believable. It's completely stupid. And that's just my opinion on that. I thought Raw was way better. Eric Bischoff, man, he was just a great heel general manager. I just loved how, and I'm not even a Eric Bischoff mark, but I just love him as a heel because he knows how to piss people off. And he is just such an evil bastard. And Stephanie was just a skank. It was kind of like Vicky Guerrero almost. It's just like she's a skank and you just don't want to see her. She's not a heel that you hate. She's a heel that you just don't care about. And speaking of which, let's get on to this here, shall we? Vicky Guerrero. Oh my god. And to another, because I know that this isn't an unpopular opinion. I think most of us can agree that we can't stand Vicky Guerrero. But I thought that Edge was highly overrated. I always thought Edge was overrated as a singles competitor. All right. I think that he's a solid wrestler and a solid competitor, a solid main eventer. But his character and, he never did it. The only time I was a huge fan of Edge was when he was with Lita. That's when I was a huge Edge head. But after that, when he started going out with Vicky Guerrero and all that shit, I just said, Edge, his character just went downhill. Had they made him, and plus the PG era didn't help either. I mean, I think Edge, he was on a roll with something, because I was really starting to get into Edge in 2005, 2006, when he had sex with Lita on Raw, and he was feuding with John Cena, and he cashed in and beat Cena at New Year's Revolution 2006. I thought he was on to something. But, after that, after, like, he basically went back to SmackDown and, Lita broke up with him and she retired and Edge went with Vicky Guerrero. I thought that was just stupid, man. And I disagree with Diesel 101 Raw when he says that his favorite year for Edge was 2002, because I remember he said that. And, I always thought I thought that was a really, really mediocre year for Edge. Aside from him pulling pranks on Kurt Angle, I can't even remember what he did. And, of course, teaming up with Hulk Hogan. But I can't even remember anything, like, great that Edge did, aside from make fun of Kurt Angle that year. So, yeah, to me, Edge was overrated. The rated R superstar became the rated PG superstar. And, just not that great afterwards, After Lita, his career was just never the same. Let's see here. What next? Oh, DX. Let's talk about DX. More specifically, 2006 DX and anything afterwards. I do not give a shit about DX. Okay? Like, I loved DX when I was a kid in the late 90s. Shawn Michaels became heel. Triple H was like his sidekick. And then they brought in the Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, Mr. Ass, and X-Pac. That was good shit. But I am not a fan of the DX that we got after 2006, in 2006 and afterwards. Because it was nothing but cheesy, corny jokes. Like, literally, they used to joke around in the Attitude Era, yes. They used to do perverted shit in the Attitude Era, yes. But it was a better environment for them to do that type of shit in. And on top of that, the shit that they did was a lot more shocking at the time and funny. In 2006, when they were feuding with Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon, I thought they were fucking boring as hell. I thought they were unfunny. I thought they were unoriginal, uncreative. I just thought that they were just trying to sell those fucking D-Generation X t-shirts. I literally could not stand D-Generation X in 2006. I hated them even more in 2009. And on top of that, it was just really, really hard to, when you become older and cynical to the business and Triple H is fucking Stephanie, and that he's not really a degenerate, he's not really against Vince, their father-in-law, son-in-law. All right, you can't take D-Generation X seriously after that. Once you know that he's best in cahoots with Vince McMahon, you can't take a rebellious organization seriously. Let me give you a perfect example. It would be like if, you had like, I can't think of a really good, but let me give you guys, for those of you who are fans of like rap and hip hop and all that shit, let's say you get like a guy like a Tupac Shakur, a guy who's supposed to be, for black people, and he's like a real gangster thug, and all that shit, and let's just say Tupac Shakur, like behind the scenes, he's working for the government. He's trying to make it seem like he's down for his people, he's down for black people and rap and hip hop and all that stuff. But then you find out that Tupac Shakur was actually in cahoots with the U.S. government. and that he was actually trying to destroy the black community or something like that, you know. And what would you think of Tupac then? Of course, most of you would not be fans of Tupac anymore. I know for a fact most of you would not. And if you still would be, then wow, you guys literally praise fucking sellouts. But, you know, 2006 D-Generation X was a huge fucking sellout to me. I thought it sucked. I thought it was unoriginal, unentertaining. Them feuding with Spirit Squad was a snore fest. And I just did not give a shit for him after 2000, you know. And the last time I ever popped for DX was in 2000 with China, Billy Gunn, Triple H, and you know, they were all teaming up to take on the Radicals in 2000. That was the last time I ever popped for D-Generation X. Other than that, I do not give a shit about DX now. You know, every reunion that they've had sucks. Everything, it's just pointless. It's fucking pointless. You know, so yeah, I don't give a shit about D-Generation X. And on that note, well, I actually have time for one more. Because this video is actually, you know what, two more. Let's talk about, since we're on the subject of DX Triple H in 2000, let's talk about this triangle right here that a lot of people on the internet and even people in pro wrestling magazines have been overrating the hell out of this storyline like a motherfucker. Let's talk about the love triangle between Kurt Angle, Stephanie McMahon, and Triple H. This was pointless as fuck. I know you're trying to turn Triple H face somewhat after, you know, feuding with The Rock and all that, and you're trying to make him like, you know, somewhat of an anti-hero with this storyline. But there's no point. You're going to turn him heel again anyway, just to feud with Stone Cold. All right? I mean, it's like, what was the point of this love triangle? There was no point. I mean, Stephanie McMahon, to me, it was just a way for Stephanie McMahon to get more heat, Kurt Angle to get more heat, and Triple H to look kind of like an anti-hero. There was absolutely no point in this storyline to me. I really did not see the purpose of it. You know, Kurt Angle and Stephanie McMahon were not fucking behind the scenes. There was no chemistry. Even Stephanie McMahon said that Kurt Angle was a terrible kisser. So, I mean, I remember her in an interview saying that Kurt Angle was a terrible kisser. You know, she likes Kurt Angle, but not that way. And, you know, it was pointless. It was just like, oh my God, like, is she really going out with Kurt Angle and stuff like this? And you had, like, Triple H teaching Trish Stratus how to wrestle, making it seem like he was going to have an affair with Stephanie, you know, on Stephanie with Trish. But, you know, it was just pointless, you know. I did not see the point of it. It was stupid. It was boring. To me, it was just filler. It was the true definition of what a filler storyline is in this business. And I just did not see the point of the Stephanie McMahon, Triple H love triangle with Kurt Angle. I did not see the point of it. To me, it was only just to get Kurt Angle more heat so he could become the WWF champion in his first year in the business. But aside from that, that's it. I mean, what else? What good came from this storyline that was like really that memorable? I mean, people overrate the fuck out of this storyline. And to be quite honest, I do not know why. To this day, I don't know why. But on that note, that's all I have to say about that. And this right here is my last topic for this video. Seth Rollins. Alright? He's basically the new quote-unquote, he's with the Authority, you know, the modern day McMahon-Helmsley regime, which I always thought was crap too, but I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. I think we all think that the Authority is crap. But what I do think it is an unpopular opinion is the fact that I find Seth Rollins to be highly overrated. I'm sorry, the guy is good. He's okay. You know, but he is nothing like what you IWC, YWC marks make him out to be. He is not the guy. He is not the guy who's going to save the WWE. He's not the best heel in the business. He's not the best heel, like, No, I mean his heel work is mediocre at best. I'm sorry. J&J Security, his whole stick with Kane and all this crap, it's mediocre as fuck. And Seth Rollins is a cool guy and all, but he's definitely overrated. I mean, you guys, maybe he's booked wrong. Maybe he's not being booked right. I don't care. I don't know. To me, I always thought that Seth Rollins was overrated. I just never, like, to me, him on the mic, his voice just sounds like CM Punk. I mean, this guy, like, there's nothing about him that strikes me as original. I mean, there's nothing about this guy that really strikes me as, oh my God, this guy is like the new guy. He's gonna carry the WWE into the future. Or, to me, he was just another guy in the Shield. I'm sorry. To me, Dean Ambrose stood out the most in the Shield. I never cared about the Shield. I always thought the Shield was overrated, but I like Dean Ambrose, but I never cared about Roman Reigns. Obviously, you all know that. And I just never really cared about Seth Rollins like that. I just never gave a shit. I mean, he's an okay wrestler and all that, but I mean, there's nothing about Seth Rollins that strikes me as the guy, or the guy who deserves to be champion, or the guy who's going to carry the WWE into the future. I just don't see that with Seth Rollins. And, you know, I just think Dean Ambrose deserves it more. That's just my opinion. Not just because Seth Rollins is a heel and Ambrose is a face right now. I just don't think that Rollins is as great as you guys say he is. I mean, that's just my opinion. And on that note, I am done with this video. And leave your comment, feedback, disagree, agree, whatever. Let me hear what you think in the comments, and hope you enjoyed the video. Okay, guys, I am done. Later.